World of Warcraft is an MMORPG made by Activision Blizzard that came out way back in 2004, taking the MMORPG genre by storm and helping forge it into what it is today. And honestly, the game still remains one of the biggest MMOs out there. So in this video, I'm going to cover some information about WoW, my personal pros and cons list for the game, and what type of player I think will and won't enjoy WoW, and if it's worth for them to play the game in 2021. Now, if you do decide that WoW is a game you do want to start and play, I do have a complete beginner guide for WoW, as well as some beginner class guides on my YouTube channel to help ease you into the game, so feel free to check those out. So kicking this off, we're going to cover the payment model. Now, WoW is still one of the very few MMOs that has a required sub, with that sub costing about $15 per month. But as you purchase longer subscription durations, the average per month cost does go down. Now, the subscription gives you access to all previously released content, so you will still need to purchase the latest expansion, which usually costs around $40 in order to gain access to the new content and zones. Now, do keep in mind that while WoW does have like a little microtransaction store, it's nothing compared to other games that are usually buy to play or free to play. It just has like a couple of like extra tiny cosmetics in it that honestly some people don't even think are all that great. So the good thing is that you paying your $15 a month and you're getting basically everything. WoW is a fantasy themed MMORPG, though set in the world of Azeroth. It is a theme park MMO with a vertical progression, which means that you have to complete and do certain content to actually move on to other content. It doesn't have the same type of freedom as like a sandbox or horizontal progression MMO. WoW also has tab targeting, cooldown based combat, and all of the classes do have a ton of their abilities at their disposal. Some classes have more, some classes have less. It just depends on the class that you choose. Now, the level cap at the moment for the game is level 60. 1 to 10 is done on a brand new tutorial island that came out with Shadowlands called Exile's Reach, which does a really good job introducing new players to the game. From 10 to 50, new players will play through the previous expansion storyline, Battle for Azeroth, to help segue them into the Shadowlands story that plays out from 50 to 60. However, returning players or alts can play through any previous expansion they want from level 10 to 50, allowing them to level through their expansion of choice. Now, WoW has 12 different classes, with each class having 3 specs, or known as, you can basically look at them as like subclasses, and you can choose from 3 of them, although there's one class that has 4, and another with 2, but most classes have 3. Now, while the classes are not gender locked, only certain races can play certain classes for lore-specific reasons. And speaking of which, the game has 24 races split into 2 factions, the Alliance and the Horde, who at the time are not really able to interact with each other outside of fighting in PvP. Now, fighting each other, that is, in PvP. Now, each faction has 7 races that you can play by default, with 5 allied races for each faction that you can unlock by completing in-game achievements and quest lines. In addition, usable armor and weapon types are also determined by your class, and each specialization also has 7 talent rows of 3 choices per row, as well as 3 PvP talents that you can choose from to add additional active or passive abilities to your character, allowing you to further customize the way you play. The game also has tons of different crafting and gathering professions with 14 available options. Professions have had quite a storied history throughout WoW. They've had periods of time where they were mandatory and other times where they were totally useless. Currently, I think professions have a very solid place in the game, with certain crafting professions being able to create a base item that players need to craft an important piece of gear for their endgame character progression. So with there being a good demand for these base crafted armor pieces, it also creates demand for the materials. So while you don't necessarily need these professions for combat reasons, they do play a good role in the in-game economy currently. And speaking of the economy, the game does have a central auction house, making it easy to buy and sell things to other players on your faction on your server. Speaking of servers, the game does run off of a realm system and not a mega server system. However, there is some cross-realm tech in the game as well as sharding, so you may see people from other realms from time to time. In most cases, you cannot trade or send items to people or alts on other servers, only to characters and alts on the server and faction you are on. So I do recommend for most players to try to put most of their characters in one place. One question I do get asked a lot from a new player is, what server is best for me? And I personally recommend choosing a high pop or full server that is close to where you live. So if you give like WoW server locations, just like a quick Google search, you can see where the server data centers are located, allowing you to pick a server that will offer you really good ping. Now, World of Warcraft does have the stereotypical gear treadmill. Gear has different levels called item levels, or eye level for short, and in general, the higher the eye level of a piece of gear, the better it is. Harder content drops higher eye level gear, with the goal obviously to get as good of gear as possible to make your character more powerful. However, when new content patches are released with new raids and new PvP seasons, they will release newer gear with higher item levels, so you will have to grind out new gear to continue to increase your character's power level. WoW does have fantastic PvE options, offering 5-player dungeons and 10 to 30-person raids with a wide variety of difficulties for any level of player. Now, the game also has a couple of different PvP options, with 2v2 and 3v3 ranked arena, which are essentially one life team deathmatch, ranked battlegrounds, which have anywhere from 10 to 40 players, with the objective varying based on the map. And the game also has unranked arena and battlegrounds if you're looking to just practice or get some initial gear. The game technically does have world PvP, but it is opt-in only, and it definitely isn't nearly as popular as it used to be back in the day. Now, you can only be in one guild at a time, with the guild being tied to your server. But if you want to join some sort of like cross-server guild in essence, there is a feature called communities, which essentially are that, but they are, keep in mind, they are faction specific. But the community just serves kind of more of a purpose to chat with other people, while guilds have the traditional features you'd expect, like a guild bank tab, tabards, repairs, the actual like guild tab with all the information, and some other guild specific perks. Now, the game does have a bunch of different ways to travel around the map. Flight paths are in general the way to get from one place to another, and the game also does have ground and flying mounts. But every character also will have an item called a Hearthstone, where they can set a home location to, and by using the Hearthstone, they can just teleport back to that location, and that does have a cooldown. The game does also have a fantastic pet and mount system with hundreds of earnable in-game pets and mounts. So if you're a collector, you're going to go nuts with this system. There's even a mini game where you can challenge other players or certain NPCs to pet battles, which gives like a very Pokemon kind of vibe. Now, WoW's content patches tend to be on the bigger side, since the game does have vertical progression and not horizontal. So patches will typically introduce new raids, PvP seasons, gear, systems, and more, giving you plenty to do each time a new patch is released. But one thing, Joe, is that quests in WoW are not voice acted. I know for some people that's an important thing, but they are not. They have, in the recent expansions, done a lot better with cutscenes during the questing process, which are really, really good. But the quests themselves are not voice acted. And in WoW, leveling kind of tends to be more of a means to an end, with the true game really opening up once you hit max level. Leveling is more just kind of to set up the end game and the story for the max level activities. Now, moving into our pros list, WoW does have a lot of good things about it. Now, in previous expansions, there was a lot that you actually had to do per week and even per day in order to maintain your character, and it would feel like you just had to do chores every day when you logged in to keep your character viable, and if you didn't do them, you'd fall behind, and it would just feel very exhausting. But that got fixed a lot in Shadowlands, and the required things that you need to do are now kind of weekly instead of daily. So, and there's not that much you have to do, because you could usually knock the things that you really need to do out in only a couple of hours, leaving you the rest of the week to do just whatever you want. Now, there's lots of ways to customize your character with the current Shadowlands features. There are essentially sub-factions that you can join in Shadowlands that are called Covenants, with your character being able to join one of 4 Covenants. Now, these Covenants will give you access to specific cosmetic rewards, a home base that you can go into with other members of your Covenant, a general Covenant ability that you can use, and a class-specific Covenant skill. There's also mini talent trees called Soulbinds, and more. In addition, you can also wear, at the moment, one piece of legendary gear that has an effect of your choice. So you simply need to farm the effect recipe to get what you want specifically for your character, get some of those base pieces that you need that I mentioned earlier, and then bam, you can create a legendary item for your character. And it doesn't require any like crafting professions to actually put the legendary together. It just requires a different system called Torghast, which I'm actually going to go over in my cons list. Now, WoW does have challenging PvE. In my opinion, WoW does set the gold standard for its PvE content, with the raids being challenging with interesting mechanics while offering a wide variety of difficulty levels so that players of all skill levels can see the content. The lowest difficulty level is like a looking for raid type of version, which you could actually queue for, but anything more difficult than that does require you to manually find a group. Mythic Plus also adds a competitiveness to the dungeon scene as well, giving the dungeons additional levels, so to speak. Typically, dungeons have normal, heroic, and then mythic, with Mythic Plus going beyond that. This system gives dungeon monsters basically more perks and powers, as well as making the mobs themselves more powerful the higher difficulty level your Mythic Plus dungeon is once you've entered. Now, WoW is one of the only MMOs that also has solid rated PvP. And while, of course, the balance isn't perfect because no game ever is, I've yet to play another MMO with rated PvP as good as WoW's. I do have some issues with it, though, mainly with finding people to play with, and I will cover that in the cons section. WoW has tons to do. With WoW being as old of a game as it is, the game has tons of content to explore, cosmetics to earn, mounts to farm, areas to check out, etc. There's no shortage of content in a game that's been out for this long, especially if you like to explore old content and farm cosmetics. Now, I think the combat's pretty good. That's why in my pro section. I know some people hate tab targeting, but WoW does tab targeting really, really well. Each class feels and plays differently, with some skills having niche uses and some purely for utility. It still has that classic MMO feel with its combat, but has aged really well with plenty of updates and modernization. Again, I know some people love tab targeting, some people hate tab targeting, so this one's going to kind of be in the eye of the beholder. Now, the final pro that I have is that the overall game performance is fantastic. Sure, you'll get some occasional lag from time to time, but compared to other MMOs, WoW's performance is very rarely a concern, and most of the time, the game runs great. Now, moving into my cons list, because again, we could talk about how great a game is until we're blue in the face, but you want to know, well, what do I have to look out for? Now, my first con is kind of ties into what I mentioned with the legendaries earlier, and that's going to be Torghast. Now, Torghast is a new feature that came out with Shadowlands that allows you to create your legendary item, and it's a roguelike type of game mode. You can run it solo or with multiple players up to 5, with the instant scaling based on the number of players. Now, there are multiple wings with multiple difficulties that have different enemy types, and you can earn different perks along each floor to make your character stronger, and you have to fight enemies and defeat bosses to progress to the next floor. Now, you would need to do 2 wings of Torghast each week to earn a currency called Soul Ash, and you use the Soul Ash with the legendary recipe and the other base items I mentioned earlier to actually create the legendary. Soul Ash is like that currency that you need to actually create it with an NPC that is in Torghast. Now, the issue with this system that I have is that it's 100% mandatory to interact with, and it just feels like a chore to do each week. Now, I'm sure some people do like Torghast, but much of the community and people that I've interacted with aren't really the biggest fan of it. I do think this feature would have been much better if it was something players could choose to do and had more cosmetic rewards tied to it, rather than just being like a mandatory vehicle that you need to interact with to get your legendary Soul Ash. So, again, I'm not the biggest fan of Torghast. I do wish it was optional, but for the moment, it is kind of just a chore that you have to do weekly. And unfortunately, if you want to play multiple characters, it feels even more overwhelming to do because you have to do it on every single character. And speaking of doing things with more characters, my next con is that current catch-up mechanics are terrible. A new player joining the game right now, or someone creating an alt, would have a very tall order ahead of them to catch up between farming Covenant Renown, which is this thing that it's basically, you can almost think of it like a reputation. It gives you more powers in your soulbind tree that I mentioned earlier, which is like that secondary, like mini passive tree. You'd also have to farm up gear, soul ash, conduits, which are essentially passive boosts that you can put in the soulbind tree, and more. There's just a lot to do, especially on the gear end of things. Blizzard has done a pretty bad job, unfortunately, of adjusting the gear curve over the course of the patch, with the difference between a new level 60 and a fully geared main character being staggeringly high. You can gear in multiple ways in WoW through dungeons, PvP, and raids, which is great, and which is great overall. But a fresh level 60 trying to get geared later into a WoW patch, which is currently that right now at this period of time, it's insanely difficult. They need to just, in my opinion, adjust the curve as patches go on to make it easier for newer or returning players, or people just creating alts, to be able to gear up their characters and start playing endgame content. I'm not saying that it needs to be immediate, but right now it is a tall order to get alts set up and ready to go. Now, the systems in Shadowlands really lock you into a lot of your choices. Now, while you can try your Covenant skills while leveling up, once you decide on a Covenant, you're pretty much locked in. I mean, granted, yes, you can switch your Covenant, but you're going to lose all of your progress and have to start from the ground floor in terms of some of like all your Covenant progression with that new Covenant. And if you decide you want to go back to your previous Covenant, you're going to have a laundry list of tasks that you need to do in order to do so. Now, here is my biggest #1 problem with WoW at the moment. Finding other players to play endgame content with is very, very difficult. WoW's current LFG system is beyond terrible. To do endgame content like Mythic Plus, raids, or rated PvP, you need to manually group up with other players. The issue, however, is that the current tool you use to find those players is very limited. It doesn't tell you any information about the players who apply to join your group outside of their class, role, and gear level, and you rely on third-party tools to look at that player's current and past experience levels and other relevant information you may want to know. If you don't use these to check, people can just lie to try to get in groups above their skill level or maybe with a spec that you don't want to play with. Also, while you're actively trying to find people to play with through this LFG, you cannot do anything else. You can't browse other group listings, queue for other activities. You can't do anything. You're just stuck running laps in the main city, praying that someone's going to eventually apply to your group. It currently feels like you spend more time looking for people to play with in WoW than you actually do playing the game. And like I said, this is personally my biggest gripe of the game, and it's always caused me to take breaks from WoW in the past when I don't have, like if I'm playing with friends and a bunch of them take a break and I don't have people to play with and I try to find new people, and like I said, it just feels like I spend more time looking for people than I do actually playing. And in my opinion, Blizzard seriously needs to improve this system. My final con is content drought. Now, currently, Shadowlands is going through a bit of a content drought with very little communication from Blizzard. You know, the current patch has been out for quite some time, and there's been very little communication about the future. Blizzard has typically been bad about communicating updates with its player base, and while Shadowlands actually started off very well on that front, it does seem to have fallen off a bit as the expansion has gone on. Shadowlands, in general, just started with a bang. It started off fantastic, but it's felt like Blizzard released this great expansion and then kind of like disappeared into the ether, giving us little information about when the next content update would be and what's still in store for Shadowlands. And people fear that this may be a pattern for the rest of the expansion, and it is something to consider. Now, moving into our final section, should you play? Now, if you are a raider or a dungeon diver, absolutely. The game has very challenging PvE content, and you can get really competitive and hardcore with the endgame PvE. There is a lot of progression that can be made in terms of your skill level. Same thing if you're a PvPer. If you're looking for team-based PvP, absolutely. Cannot recommend WoW enough. If you're looking for more of like a solo 1vx type of PvP, then I would say no, because WoW's PvP is fundamentally team-based. So if you like that type of gameplay, I'd highly recommend it. Arena and BGs are fun and competitive, and if you have friends to play with, it is one of the best PvP experiences in any MMO, in my opinion. But with that being said about PvP and raiding and dungeons, though, the biggest caveat I have is that, like I said in my cons section, it can be very hard to enter the endgame scene and find players to play with. LFG can be a very miserable experience with finding people, and finding arena teammates or a guild to raid with can feel like you're applying for an entry-level job with 10 years experience required. The game is fun when you can actually play it, but actually getting to a point that you have people to play with is a challenge in and of itself. So, granted, LFG mileage and experience may vary, but overall, from a lot of people that I've seen, as well as my own previous interactions, LFG can be a very, very difficult thing to kind of wade through. If you're a quester or a casual, personally, I'd say no for the questing experience. Now, while the questing experience in WoW has definitely improved over time, it's still frankly a means to an end to get to endgame. And if you're like a more casual player, I'm going to say it depends. Shadowlands is definitely better than previous expansions for casual players. But if you still have some required things that you need to do weekly, or your character will fall behind in terms of power level. However, however, the amount required that you need to do weekly is like maybe 2 to 3 hours worth, and that's about it, assuming you're not catching up. Now, again, I think you have to kind of temper your expectations. If you're looking to be like a, heroic raider and you don't really want to play that much, then, obviously no. But if you're looking to just like, maybe do LFG or some unrated PvP, and that's kind of really all you're looking for out of your Shadowlands experience, then it is going to be good for casuals. Like I said, it just kind of depends on how much time you have and the level of difficulty of content that you actually want to interact with. So keep in mind that the less time you put in, the lower difficulty content you're going to be able to interact with. Finally, housing and cosmetics people. I'm going to say no for people who like housing. The game does not have a housing system at all like other games like Old School RuneScape or ESO, and I personally do think it's a huge missed opportunity. On the other hand, if you are into collecting pets, mounts, gear appearances, which are also known as transmogs, then I'm going to say a huge absolutely. There is a nauseating amount of stuff to collect since WoW puts most of their cosmetics in the game and not in a microtransaction store. So guys, to sum it up, World of Warcraft is a great MMORPG and has been one of the biggest games in the genre for quite some time. A lot of people hate on the game because it's the biggest or because they tried it once back in the day and haven't played it since. But with that being said, Shadowlands, for its faults, is still a great expansion, and I do highly recommend giving it a try, especially if you have friends who play the game. My personal best experiences in WoW have always consistently been when I have friends to play with and there's a ton of content to do and get lost in. But guys, with that being said, that is going to be it for me today for my Is WoW Worth Playing in 2021. I hope you guys did find this video useful and learned something from it. And if you did, I would appreciate it if you smacked a like on it. If you have any questions about World of Warcraft or any comments that you want to share with others looking to get into the game, feel free to leave them below. And guys, if you want to see more Is It Worth It type of videos for MMORPGs, as well as first looks into other games, I would appreciate if you hit that sub button as well as hit the bell to keep those notifications on. But that's going to be it for me today, guys. I do hope you enjoyed the video. Appreciate some time out of your day today. Thank you very much. As always, I'm Dots Gaming, and I'll see you all next time.